Hello, I'm Dr. Jeff Kingsley, and welcome to another edition of Riding in Cars with Researchers. Today we're going to interview Mr. Eric Gildenhuys. Eric is a tech guy. Is that fair enough?
Yep.
Call you a tech guy?
Yep, tech guy, definitely.
You've been in technology for decades.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And Eric's with a company now named Deep Six, looking to assist the research industry, well, looking to disrupt the research industry.
Yes, I guess so. We definitely disrupting, looking at a different way of finding patients for clinical trials.
Talk about the pain. Why? What is there to disrupt?
Well, so if we take a look at people associate disruption with the technology. So great, we have a technology that can do something different, but the question that comes up is, how can we do things differently that's going to help getting life-saving cures to patients quicker? And Deep Six came from an intelligence community environment, and these are engineers who were able to use artificial intelligence and other components, other technology components, to find information among tons of data. And so great, that's the engine, that's something that we now can use to do something differently. But the question comes up is, what can we do differently? And we didn't know what we didn't know, so we started talking to 200 doctors. And so to answer your question is, we found out after talking to over 200 doctors that an area that could be disruptive, meaning an area that we could make things go a lot quicker, a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot simpler, was around helping researchers find and validate patients to be recruited on clinical trials.
It's painful.
Yeah, it's very painful, and it was absolutely amazing that in today's age, people don't realize this, but two aspect is, how are we finding patients today? Well, one is you either talk to doctors and you say, hey, do you know any patients that have these conditions? In the old days, they would say, yeah, and those patients would get on trials. Today it's, hey, do you know any patients? Yeah. Okay, well, I got to take a look at their medical records, because their criteria today could be anywhere from 10 to 30 different criteria requirements to allow them to be on a trial, or to make sure that they don't, they can't go on a trial because of certain exclusion criteria.
Yeah, and it's getting worse.
Right.
It's getting worse. The average IE is more than 70.
Okay, so
it's getting worse. So the pain is increasing, which greatly increases the need for a disruptive technology.
Right. And what's interesting is, we just left a meeting where we asked the clinical research coordinators. They're the ones spending the time reviewing all the patients' chart files. 85% of their time reviewing medical records. And over 50%, I've had conversations where it's 75% of their time when they're reviewing the patient's medical records, it's to invalidate them.
Right.
They trip up in exclusion criteria, or they don't match with one of the inclusion criteria. That's a lot of time. And when we say disruptive, one of the things that I also look at is, they don't know that something else exists. That's the big difference today, I think. And that's where, you've identified, what we're doing at Deep Six, and you went, holy mackerel, this is something that nobody's thought of or nobody's doing, and doing it in a different way. So that's what's exciting.
Why is the research world so slow to adopt technology that's being used elsewhere?
I think, I don't know if it's slow, but I think it has to do with a couple of components. Number one, there is a lot of regulations. So when you've got regulations, you do not want to step out of bounds. Yep. When you're looking at disruptives, I'm a person that comes up with a lot of great ideas. So I'm willing to try new things differently. And one of the things, when I meet people in the healthcare, I've got to be very literal, because you're taking care of patients' lives. If you're making a decision, it affects patient lives. So you've got everything from being literal to following regulations. So if it breaks a regulation, people are not willing to risk. So that's item number one. I think item number two is, and we briefly talked about this, healthcare is not a hierarchical, especially I'm going to talk about it from a provider standpoint. It's not a hierarchical organizational structure. in a sense that there is not one boss that says you must do it this way. The doctors are there to take care of the patients. They're going to do whatever they think is the best for the patients. Thus, trying to deploy a technology means you've got to get a lot of doctors on place. Whereas in the business world, the CEO says this is going to help the company. He's gotten feedback from everybody else, and therefore that can propagate down to the rest of the organization. That enables people to rapidly accept new ways of doing things. Sometimes it may not be done right. Sometimes it might be done right. There's the other reason why I think adoption has been a challenge.
Yeah, and that's spot on. It's hard to get doctors to agree.
Yeah,
we don't agree with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I jokingly
that is a
said.
barrier.
Yeah, I jokingly said that doctors are very similar to lawyers, and some doctors would kick me out if I said that. But the fact is both people represent the best interest of the patients.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're very similar. That's what their focus is, which is great. But it creates challenges in other areas.
So, is AI real?
AI, yes. I mean, the application of AI, the use of AI, absolutely, it is real.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it is something it is now something sexy and hot that people use as a terminology.
Yeah.
But the analogy I use is AI is the engine of whatever we're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how do we apply that engine? How do we use that engine for what purpose?
So, how does Deep Six change how I do clinical research?
I think it's two things. Deep Six is basically creating an ecosystem whereby our platform gets deployed at the providers, and it sits adjacent to whatever healthcare information system. And from a technical standpoint, what we're doing differently and how we're going to be helping and disrupting research is we're taking a copy of every single type of medical record that the provider has. And we take a copy of it, and it sits adjacent to their system, and we're applying AI to it. And there's the key thing. We're applying AI and other technologies such as NLP to read that information in such a way that we can annotate or grab all the clinical and medical concepts in the patient's records. Now, what does this mean? So that's the engine, that's the back-end engine. But what does this mean from a researcher standpoint? Number one is, from a researcher standpoint, we're providing a self-service portal where the providers can identify, or I should say find and identify patients for trials based on those 70 protocols in an easy way, meaning you don't have to go to IT. They can use it themselves. The nurses, the clinical research coordinators. So there is a easy to use tool. That enables then organizations such as yours to have staff to be able to, one, find, are there patients worthy to start a trial at a site? 50% of trials fail because you can't find patients. I just heard another study, it was 80%, from Novartis came out with a recent says 80% of trials fail because they can't find enough patients. So when so if we now have a tool that says, okay, don't even bother starting a trial, use this tool to confirm, are there patients?
Yeah.
That's just that one step, the amount of savings. I mean, we just found out at one institution, they figured out they were spending $500,000 a year starting up trials that fail.
Sure.
$500,000.
11% of research sites enroll 0 patients.
Right.
It's a massive percentage.
Right. And how much of those research sites spend time activating it, all the administrative costs, their staff to find those patients, the cost of maybe doing advertising or things, other ways to attract patients? That's a huge amount of money. And that gets fed right back up into the life sciences company, which are charging an enormous amount of money for the drugs. So if we can reduce that cost, it benefits the whole ecosystem. So
by just not starting the trial in the first place.
Exactly, just that one aspect.
And the other thing is it used to be rare disease, right? You had not rare disease and rare disease.
Got it.
And it used to be what was called small molecules for large populations. Aspirin is a small molecule.
Okay.
And everybody should take an aspirin.
Sure.
Small molecule for large populations.
Right.
And now the new paradigm is biologics. The new paradigm is large molecules, proteins,
Sure.
large molecules for small populations. We have research trials going on today where if you meet all the inclusion and exclusion criteria that we can possibly check before enrollment, great, now we enroll you, and then we do a genetic test. And if you don't have the right gene, you can't proceed because we're now looking for a very small population.
Right.
So the harder the trials become, increasingly, you're looking to only put in a few patients into the trial.
Sure.
So you need a better knife. You need a sharper tool to be able to know what trials I should or shouldn't be doing and to find every potential patient, or you can't possibly be successful doing research anymore.
I absolutely agree. I think, whether it's genetics or 70 criterias,
Yeah.
i.e. criteria, whether it's one of the or the other, the key thing that's going to happen is what's going to help the person who is going to not just look for, but validate the medical evidence. It's kind of like saying, look, do you want to spend time going through a huge stack of hay to find those needles, or do you want a tool that's going to say, here are the needles with maybe a bit of hay?
Increasingly, we're doing just-in-time trials where we do all of the startup that's worth doing to
Sure.
a point, and then we start looking for patients.
Right.
And with those just-in-time trials, as soon as we find a patient, the sponsor company finishes up activation. They
Right.
ship us drug in a matter of days. We do all the other stuff because we just found a patient.
Sure.
I'm seeing Deep 6 as being something that would dramatically change in favor of those just-in-time type models. Open a site, don't ship drug, don't ship all that stuff, and then Deep 6 is nonstop looking for patients. The second you find a patient, you finish activation.
Absolutely, because a good example is depending on the type of trial, you can track as, especially around oncology. I'm assuming that could be a really good example where you can say, okay, we're going to activate it only when we have X number of patients, and as the patients come in,
Right.
Now certain doctors are always going to know their patients, but when you think about larger institutions or researchers that have got partnerships with various different providers, tracking all that information is not going to be easy. Whereas the system can say, hey, as of yesterday or yesterday afternoon, this patient just came in, and in the physician's notes or in the pathology report that was just uploaded into the system, he matches to this criteria. And the next morning, your researcher knows this patient is eligible. There's a good example.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little story that I had, which was at a university hospital in California, whereby this one doctor says, Eric, you've got a great tool, but I don't need it. I know all my patients. And he basically said, so I know all my patients. I can, when they come in, I can invite them to a trial. It says, and all my doctors that were in the room, they know what my trial is and they know what my requirements are, so they'll refer me patients that fit to that. And before I could say a single word, the other doctors chime and says, John, we don't remember your criteria, and we don't think of your trial every time a patient comes in. So good luck on you thinking we're giving, we might remember one patient out of the hundreds that we see every day.
Yeah.
And you could see the guy's face. He was just like, what? And this is a platform that takes that stress away from those doctors to remember it.
Right.
And it empowers then whoever's running the trial, meaning the researcher or the site administrator, to basically determine that, which then comes back to also activating when there's a certain number of patients in the pool.
Yeah, with nearly any multi-physician practice, if you just track what physician referred the patient, you'll always see that there's an internal champion who's the number one referral source, and then you've got physicians in the practice who refer zero.
Right.
Do they have different patients? No, they have the same patients. They're just not paying as much attention to the criteria for enrollment. But this product takes care of that.
And imagine that not just at a site, but imagine that across multiple sites.
Okay, so you're not just talking to sites. You're talking to sponsors and CROs about rolling this out at a national or global level across an entire trial.
Absolutely.
Not just at individual sites. Talk about that.
So you know, we talked about the Deep Six ecosystem. So imagine we've now got an application, a use case where the providers and the research sites such as yours have the ability to use this platform. So now, let's imagine now life sciences. Let's imagine the AstraZenecas, the Pfizers, the Novartises of the world, and the CROs where they can type a protocol, and they type in a self-service protocol, and it pings all the different sites. Think of like kayak.com. I use that as an analogy. You say, hey, I want to go from this city, and it goes and pings American Airlines and all the different airlines, and it comes back with price. Well, with them, they ping, they type in the protocol, and it pings all the different sites, and says, how many patients, just the aggregate number, how many patients do you have that fit this criteria, that match this criteria, that match this criteria, and it comes back in real time and gives them that information. This enables the life sciences companies today to, one, become much more effective in trial design.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Okay.
That's exactly where my brain went.
Yeah, because how many times do you come out with somebody's used macro information, dated payers claims data, or better yet, ICD-9 codes, which is basically based on billing codes, based on which is maybe not what really the patient had. Okay, but so basically they have real-time information knowing where the patients are, so they can. Let me backtrack for a second. First, trial design, trial feasibility, site selection. Okay, so that means, hey, they can, they know, guess what, IAC, you've got 50 patients that fit to my protocol. They can share that protocol with you.
Right.
You don't have to retype it. You can then review it. Then you can work with your providers to basically confirm and validate that those patients are recruitable, which comes back to just in time. So you can basically say, yeah, we've reviewed their medical evidence. They are recruitable. Well, all we have to do now is bring them in for screening, for pre-screening, as you guys call it.
Yeah.
That's
excellent.
That means you've now got a higher level of confidence. Does that guarantee those patients are all going to be on a trial? Absolutely not, because there's some pre-screening requirements that they might trip up on. But you've now got a higher level of confidence that that trial can be successful,
right,
and be far more productive.
Probabilities, right?
Exactly. I mean, if I was, the life sciences, I had conversations with some life science guys, and they've got, they were spending enormous amount of money on analytics, on data, on dated information, and they're basically doing their statistical based on a percentage of it will be successful, and that percentage is like 2%. Now with our platform, they can be far more confident that they can go, oh, you know what, we've got a 50 to 60% chance of being successful because it's real time. It's based on not just coded but unstructured data. It's the physician's notes, it's the pathology reports, because nobody's able to read through all that information and provide that, and confirm that these patients are eligible based on that type of data.
Yeah, and the physicians don't have to do anything different. They can still be a physician.
Exactly.
See your patient, care for your patient, document everything in the EMR. You don't need to start using a different platform. You continue to use the EMR that you're already using today. And then this is going to look at labs and path reports and your notes, and it's going to look at what you wrote in the physician, in what's called the free text field.
Absolutely.
Where you're documenting, I think it's this, that, or the other thing.
I think you brought up a really good point, that from a physician standpoint, at the providers at their practice, they don't have to operationally change anything.
Right.
And secondly, one of the things that some people don't realize is that, and the ones who really get impacted are the clinical research coordinators, and that's you guys, is that 80% of the criteria is in that free text information.
Yeah.
Okay, it's in the pathology report where the pathologist has dictated into something which has been converted into text about what was his findings from the from the test. So, the doctor's typing in, and sometimes they type it in their own annotation of certain conditions. This gives you guys the ability to find that, find patients based on that information.
Yeah.
So huge disruption. Absolutely agree.
Okay, it's going to be game changing. I'm a believer. So we just showed the product, just demoed the product to some of our investigators, physicians, office staff, research coordinators. And we saw the looks on people's faces when they get lit up and go, wow, I can't wait to use this.
Yeah.
It's cool. So congratulations to you and your team.
Thank you.
It really is quite awesome.
Yeah, the team in the back end is, I'm getting the joy of presenting it, but it's the team in the back that's done all the hard work to make this thing done. So it's great.
Well, you know, research is getting harder, and it's getting harder for good reasons, but it's unsustainable. We have to implement new strategies to deal with the fact that research is getting harder, because if it just keeps getting harder, eventually you slow down R&D, and slowing down R&D is not an acceptable outcome. So this is right place, right time.
I think it is, especially the analogy I use is, you know, manually reviewing chart files. You know, that's the way we've been doing it for 20 years, and I think there's a new generation, especially people who are technology oriented, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
And now that, you know, when you've got enough pain, people are going to change behaviors. So there you go.
Well, on that note, Eric, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for riding along. As always, follow us on social media, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Send us your comments. If you have questions, I'm happy to put you in touch with Eric. Great product, great company, worth looking into more deeply. Deep
Thanks.
Six.
Exactly right.
See what I did there?
Yep, I did.